There are lots of teddy bears, but only one Teddy Ruxpin.
Hi, my name is Teddy Ruxpin. Can you and I be friends?
Sure, Teddy.
Your friend is what I'd like to
He's
be.
alive. How does he do that? He's a magic bear.
Welcome to Amusing Jews, where we celebrate Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. I'm Jonathan Friedmann.
And I'm Joey Angelfield.
Producer-engineer Mike Tomren is working somewhere behind the scenes. Amusing Jews is a project of Adat Chaverim, Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Jewish Museum of the American West, and Atheists United Studios. Hey, Joey. Thinking back on my childhood, I'm amazed at how I managed to go to school, do my homework, take music lessons, play Little League Baseball, collect baseball cards and comic books, create elaborate stories with action figures, and still find time each day to watch hours of cartoons. In fact, my most vivid memories of those days involve sitting on the couch, eating snacks, and watching whatever cartoon came on the TV. This might explain why the chorus of voices in my head belong to various animated characters, including one created by today's guest.
We're excited to talk with Phil Barron, a voice actor, singer, and songwriter best known as the voice of Teddy Ruxpin. He also voiced Piglet on the 1980s Disney Channel series Welcome to Pooh Corner. Phil, welcome to Amusing Jews.
Thank you. It's so great to be with you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we appreciate you. So, let's start from the top.
Sure.
How did you land the role of Teddy Ruxpin and develop his voice?
Okay, two separate things, really. I'll give you the short answer to the first part of that question, which is how did I land the role? So it was 10:30 at night in spring of 1985, and I was sitting with my wife watching a TV show of some kind, and phone rang, and it was a guy named George Wilkins. George was head of music at Disney. I think he still was at that time, and I had met him when Will Ryan and I came out to L.A. To do some recording for Disney Studios. And we'd had lunch with George, and we'd hung out with him a little bit. I could talk about George for hours, and he's still one of my closest friends. And George said, hey, there's this toy that I've written a bunch of songs for, and the guys who cast the guy who's doing the voice didn't realize that we had all these fabulous songs, and so they cast someone who doesn't sing. And he had already recorded a couple of the storybooks, evidently. And he said, could you come down to the studio and just loop the singing for the guy and see if it's a good voice match? I said, sure, when do you want to do it? He said, now. So around 11 o'clock, I rolled out of the driveway and drove over to what was then Emmylou Harris's studio, called Magnolia Sound in North Hollywood. And I sang a couple of songs, and they got on the talkback and said, that's great. Could you just read some lines for us also? I said, sure. So I read a couple of Teddy lines, and I said, hi there, how are you? And like that. And it was just naturally, what the character called for. And they got on the talkback, and they said, what are you doing tomorrow? And so that led to, 3 or 4 years of constant recording, writing, and creativity, actually. So that was it. And Teddy at the time had a sidekick in the books that he always did, named Grubby, and Grubby was played by Will Ryan. So Will and I were partners. We came out here together to do things for Disney. And so he was already Grubby. We had already sung together for 5-6 years at that point. 6 years, actually. And so it was a natural blend.
I think the chemistry actually comes across now that you mention that, because it is this really endearing relationship between Teddy and Grubby. And I had no idea that you were actually friends in real life.
Yeah. I mean, we worked together every day for many, many years. Traveled together, traveled around the Midwest, played gigs, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of gigs. We had our own radio show in Cleveland called the Willio and Filio Radio Show. And we had done an album in Cleveland called the world's first Willio and Filio record album. And we dropped that off at Disney one day, and they called us and asked us to write some songs. They liked the way we did them, and so they invited us to sing on a bunch of Disney albums. So there's one called Goin' Quackers, one called Pardoners, one called Disney's Merry Christmas Carols. Sorry, Jewish audience. And we did a whole lot of stuff, and that led to us working on the Winnie the Pooh series. So we can talk about that later. And going back to the end of your question, Joey, about how I developed the voice, I just looked at the script, and I thought about this little character talking directly to a child, probably in bed, maybe on the couch, having sort of a one-on-one relationship with this child. And so, of course, that's going to bring out the gentle side of you. And because he's small, I just kind of raised my voice a little bit. And he never yells, Teddy doesn't. He's just always very gentle and very direct and caring about the child that he's talking to. And I think that's what made it work. There's an intimacy and a trust between the character and the child. And that's what sets Teddy apart from other characters who are simply on a screen. Here you have a character who actually lives in the three-dimensional world, the same world that the child lives in their room, in their play space, in their yard. So it's really a kind of a different assignment than a two-dimensional character that you can't touch.
Enjoying the show? Click like and subscribe.
Well, like many kids, I was mesmerized by how the words on the cassette synced up with the bear's mouth. And actually, I know Teddy Ruxpin was technically not a bear, but a bear-like creature known as an ILOP.
Correct.
Nevertheless, the mechanics are pretty brilliant. The cassettes used a left track for audio and the right track for a controlled data stream. I'm wondering what it was like for you to see your voice coming from the ILOP's mouth.
The first time I saw Teddy Ruxpin was at that second recording studio the following day, and it was someone else's voice in it at the time that had been programmed, and Ken Forsey, who created it, held it up for me and said, "What do you think?" And I have to say, I thought it was a little scary. It really was, because it was alive, kind of. So by the time it got to me being in there, hell, it was sort of delightful, actually, by the time I saw it. So I got used to the idea. So you mentioned the animatronics of it. Ken Forsey, the creator of it, had worked at Disney as an engineer, and he worked on the Country Bear Jamboree characters. So he just always thought, this would be really cute if you could bring it down into a character that people could have at home. And so that's where the whole thing started. And being an engineer, he was able to imagine what that extra track would do with the code and so forth that would make things move. So that's how it happened.
Do you have any thoughts about the bear not really being a bear?
Well, Ken actually had a whole chart which showed the evolution of the ILOP and where the ILOP split off from Homo sapiens. So, yeah, there isn't an actual thought of, how that whole thing worked anthropologically. So are there actual ILOPs? Perhaps.
Yeah, as long as it's grounded in science, I think I'm okay with that.
There you go.
This seems like a big reveal, too. You're saying that ILOPs are closer relatives to humans than they are to bears.
I'd say there's a hybrid of sorts there, right? So we're mammals. ILOPs are mammals, but they developed in a sort of in-between space between bears and humans.
And it's a kid's product, so I suppose the details of how this came about in terms of the intercourse aspect of it are left to the imagination.
Thank you. Yes, that's correct. Yeah. And there's no, human ILOP hybrid breeding. That kind of breeding doesn't work.
Teddy Ruxpin was one of the best-selling toys of 1985 and 86. When did you first realize this toy would be a hit?
Well, they told me that right away, and they said, this is going to be a big hit. Now, I had heard that so many times, And I'd walked into so many recording sessions where they said, "Oh, this character, it's gonna be huge," and nothing ever happened. Which is normal, you get used to that. So when they said that this time, I said, "Oh, great!" I didn't get excited about it until I started seeing things in the newspapers, in Time magazine. It started to get tremendous marketing coverage and media coverage all over the place. There was, Teddy Ruxpin in a canoe in Central Park, and it was huge. And that was largely due to a guy named Don Kingsborough, who ran Worlds of Wonder. That was the company that put Teddy Ruxpin out. Ken Forsey had a book about that thick with ideas, lots and lots and lots of ideas. And, on page 33 or whatever, there was this talking bear toy. Ken had so many creative ideas that were all great. And he went to see Don Kingsborough, and Don was just kind of leafing through and said, "What's this? What's this? This is a really good idea. I want to do this." And Don had been one of the main drivers of Atari at that time. And so he had left to start his own toy company, and he had found the toy that was going to put his company on the map. And that was Teddy Ruxpin. And when I started hearing stories about people having fights at Toys R Us, and trying, people fighting over it. I'm friends with a guy named John Tartaglia. Do you know John by any chance? Avenue Q won the Tony. He's an incredible genius creator. Splash and Bubbles was his show. He does a lot of stuff for Henson. Anyway, his mother literally got into a fight with a woman on Christmas Eve that year over a Teddy, and she won.
There seems to be only one really hot new toy this year, but we can't show it to you because this toy store, like many others, is already sold out. What we can tell you is that it's called Teddy Ruxpin, and it's a stuffed bear that talks and moves its lips while it's talking. Plus, we can tell you it costs between $60 and $80. Ron Angelo joined the search for Teddy Ruxpin today. He bought 4, some for friends' kids, but he had to go all the way from Hampton to Virginia Beach to do it.
They won't hold them for you. My wife's been calling several days, and they say the truck's coming in. The truck comes in, they say they're sold out, so it seems to be a pretty hot item.
That's amazing. Is that the first toy that was ever in that situation? Like, that was what the Jingle All the Way movie was about also.
And there were other big things. I mean, I don't know, was the hula hoop like that where they ran out and you couldn't get one? The Fanner 50, you probably don't remember that, guys, but Fanner 50 was a gun, okay? Now, you couldn't have a gun that was a big hit today, but when I was a kid, cowboy shows were everything, and the Fanner 50 actually shot little things called shoot-'em shells. There were little green things that would shoot out and poke people's eyes out and so on, and I had to have one of those. So that might have been a big hit. I don't know if there were other toys like that where they just ran out of them, and it was an expensive toy at the time, Teddy Ruxpin was, and they were going for over what the retail price was, and there was a black market, and it got crazy for whatever reason, but it was the number one toy of 85, I think 86 also, so yeah.
The toy's success propelled the animated series The Adventures of Teddy Ruxpin, which debuted in 1986 and ran for 65 episodes, along with a feature-length direct-to-video movie. Several of the stories were taken from the toy's cassettes and storybooks. As a voice actor, what are some of the differences between recording for the toy and recording for the show?
Okay. Now I'm going to let you peek behind the curtain, because the early Teddy Ruxpin books, because of the speed of the servos, you couldn't talk too fast. So you had to talk a little slow. The second thing was they sped my voice up a quarter of a step. So with 2-inch tape, in those days, the pitch did change just very slightly at a quarter of a step. So we recorded the first books like this. "Hi there, how are you? I'd like you to meet my friend Grubby." And then it would speed it up. "I'd like you to meet my friend Grubby," right? It would sound a little bit different. When we did the TV series, we couldn't do that. It was going to be much too tedious to stop and record Teddy a little slower and then speed it up. So I said, hey guys, I've got a brilliant idea. Why don't I just talk a little higher and a little faster? And it all worked out just fine. And then from that time on, all the other recordings that we did, we didn't do the little trick in the studio. We didn't need to anymore. So could have done that from the beginning if they just asked.
Anything else you can tell us about recording the TV show?
We recorded it up in Ottawa, Canada. Why did we go all the way to Ottawa to record it? The TV show was a Canadian co-production. So what that means, for those of you who aren't savvy about this TV business stuff, showbiz stuff, the governments of some countries will help pay for a production if you hire their people. They want their people to be employed. And so they asked us to do that with this show. And Deke was the ultimate distributor of this. And they were originally a French company, and then it had Canadian connections and so on. And so the cast was largely made up of Canadians, except for Will Ryan and me. So they flew us up every other week for 4 days for a year. We flew up to Canada to do the 65 episodes. And so we had to recast all the favorite characters in the show, including many that Will did originally, because he was Grubby, he was Tweeg, for those of you who know all these characters are. He was the Willie Whatsit. I think he was Prince Aaron also. He did a lot of voices. And but we had to leave our good friend Tony Pope behind. So Tony, give you a little background on Tony. When we first came out and were doing things for Disney, and I was doing Piglet and all those kinds of things, Tony was the voice of Goofy very early on when we did that album I mentioned, Going Quackers. And then Will and Tony and I were all three just coincidentally cast on a TV series called The Rainbow Patch for NBC. And then walk into the studio to do Teddy Ruxpin, and it's Will and me and Tony again as the character Gimmick. So, but sadly, we couldn't use Tony in Canada. So he was voiced by another actor in Canada, John Stocker. So that was quite different. And it was winter up in Ottawa for a lot of the time. So it was, a little challenging doing all the travel. I had kids at home and so on, but it was still a lot of fun.
I'll tell you how much of a role this show played in my life. I cycled through a lot of garage bands back in my gigging days. And one of the bands that I formed was called Newton's Gimmick.
Oh, that's great. That makes me happy. I love that. How did you do? Or did it take off?
We were actually a little hesitant to call it that because we thought we might get sued. So we changed the name pretty quickly thereafter, but I'm proud of the name nevertheless.
It's great. I bet Ken Forsey would have loved that. And by the way, Ken really, in real life, Ken was Newton Gimmick. That's who he was. He was a tinkerer, an inventor. He was just that guy. And so I think he related very much to Newton Gimmick in the show.
Have you had any opportunities to revive Teddy Ruxpin over the years?
Yeah, there have been many opportunities. Hasbro had the license for a while, and a new company called Yes, which was really a lot of the same people from Worlds of Wonder who reformed a new company that was called Yes. And just a few years ago, there was a new Teddy Ruxpin that came out. When COVID hit, my wife and I actually produced, with Alchemy's approval, Alchemy is the original owner of the license, still are the owner. We did about a 3 or 4 minute video because we realized, those kids that Teddy Ruxpin used to talk to are now the nurses and the doctors and the first responders, and we should thank them. So we did a video, and I did a new voiceover. It wasn't, we didn't animate what I said, but we showed video of Teddy going by, and we had a song, and George gave us some music to play, and so that was really sweet. And I get requests from people. I've done Teddy's voice for people's weddings who wanted a greeting for their wedding from Teddy Ruxpin. I've done birthday greetings for people, little things like that. I'd really like to do more with Teddy. And what do you think of this? GPS with Teddy Ruxpin's voice.
Oh, nice.
That sounds like a winner.
It doesn't take the next exit. La 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 la. Sing a little song, and it would be really.
I think that's brilliant. Driving is so stressful, especially around Southern California, and it's one of the most aggravating things to hear, like a voice on a GPS that just makes things worse. Teddy would make it better.
Yeah, right, exactly. Plus, I could sing some little songs as we go along, and it'd be really fun. Anyway, I'd love to do more. I am actually starting on a book about my experiences with Teddy, and I was also one of the writers of the TV series, so we had a lot of fun along the way creating some of the new characters and some of the strange stories that we ended up with.
Before Teddy Ruxpin, you voiced Piglet in Welcome to Pooh Corner, a live-action television series that aired on the Disney Channel from 1983 to 1986. What was it like voicing an established, iconic character?
What happened there was the producer was a guy named Frank Brandt. Frank had been a producer for Disney for many years. And Frank called me and said, we're just having a really hard time casting Piglet for the show. I believe Will Ryan, my old partner, had already been cast as Tigger and Rabbit on the show. And I had no intention of even auditioning for the show. And he said, we can't get a Piglet that's right. Would you try it? So I thought, okay. So I was able to get an audio recording of one of the Winnie the Pooh movies, and I took all of the Piglet stuff out, and I re-recorded my voice where Piglet's voice was, because people were used to hearing that dialogue just to see if it would be a good match. And I worked on it until it felt right, and I sent it in. I got the part. However, because Piglet was, Pooh, he was more, a little bit of a higher register, but not super squeaky high. And the producer of the show kept pushing me, and this was from when I worked for Disney. She just kept pushing me to get it up there. No, you wound up here like this. So it was a little squeakier than what people were used to with the films. But I think I did about 100 of those 120 episodes as Piglet.
So you were tasked with taking on a voice that became a household voice by the great John Fiedler.
Yeah.
And was there like a pressure maybe to distinguish yourself from him so that you weren't seen as an imitation, or were you really trying to imitate him?
Yeah, I think when I did the audition, I was trying to do a spot on, I don't want to say impression, but a mirror image of what he had done. They didn't want that. They wanted me to distinguish the voice a little bit more. But yeah, it was a little intimidating after hearing that voice growing up, really, and having people associate with John Fiedler's voice. So that was really a difficult thing. I do remember before the Winnie the Pooh show started, there was an animated film, the last of that first group of animated Winnie the Pooh films, and Will Ryan was playing Rabbit in that. And so it was Will Ryan and Paul Winchell and all the other characters. But Hal Smith, who was Owl, and you may remember the great Hal Smith, was doing Pooh. And so when the other actors came in, Paul Winchell, in fact, said, "Hey, where's Sterling Holloway? Where is he?" He was still living. And they said, well, he hasn't been feeling well, so he's not doing it. So Hal's doing it. And then Hal wound up doing it on the series as well. What a pleasure, by the way, spending all that time with Hal Smith, who was just one of the funniest, loveliest people ever.
You've served as cantor of Valley Best Shalom in Encino, California since 2005. Have you kept up your acting chops?
Besides Purim and other opportunities to do fun things at the synagogue, the phone rings once in a while, and I get to do a voiceover job of some kind. But I did do some acting, some on-camera acting over the last couple of years. There's a short that you might want to try to catch online called The Bride of Finkelstein. Okay, so I was Finkelstein, And Will Ryan is one of the stars of it. So Will created a duo with another guy, and Nick Santamaria, and a wonderful actor. And the two of them have an act called Biffle and Schuster. Okay, and they did a number of films that were lost. Okay, from the 1940s and 50s. So they essentially became two comedians in the past, even, obviously before neither of them was born. But so it's kind of a way to do two reelers that may or may not have existed at the time, but do exist now. So they're black and white. They bring in all the crazy comedy things. There's a gorilla in it, and there's a mad scientist. So the two knucklehead guys get lost. They go up to a castle, the nearest place they could find, and they ring the doorbell, and they're led inside, and they meet the proprietor of a laboratory within the castle, who is Dr. Finkelstein. And I won't tell you any more than that. Go check it out online somewhere, YouTube, somewhere. The Bride of Finkelstein, written, produced, and directed by Michael Schlesinger. It's a lot of fun. The thing is, I happen to look exactly like an actor from the 1930s and 40s named Max Davidson.
Oh, I know Max Davidson.
You do? Okay. So I look a lot like him. And so I was basically cast without saying a word based on how I looked.
Thank you so much, Phil, for joining us.
I hope I was amusing.
More than amusing. You were amazing. And to our audience, now back to your regularly scheduled lives.
Amusing Jews is here to amuse you. If you like being amused, go ahead and click like and subscribe.